Hello and welcome to today's session. I hope you're all doing amazingly well from whichever part of the world you're watching. And I also hope that you've managed to take August as a break, whether it's summer or winter for you, or at least a few days. I'm looking forward to my break in September. I'm also looking forward to cooler weather. Though I love Madrid, summer and winter tend to be quite tough at times. Today, what I'd like to do is continue with this three-part series, which I started last week on how to create impactful wellness concepts. I talked about my journey in this industry. In my past life, I was in Goldman Sachs working with a very different entrepreneur, very different profile. And then from there, 22 years ago, I got into wellness and hospitality. I have been a wellness director. I've enjoyed being regional and also global director of wellness, spa and wellness. And I then worked for top brands, again, working on a very different portfolio of investor. And then when I decided to set up my own shop 16 years ago, is when I was introduced to a completely different investor, completely different entrepreneur. And I refer to them in my book, The Wellness Asset. I call them the forward thinking and innovative hoteliers. And today we could talk to them or refer to them as a social entrepreneur. And it has been interesting to see those who have had success in this last 16 years, 10 years plus, what exactly they did and what those who didn't have the success they thought, what went wrong. So when I went back to the drawing board, I saw what do each of the social entrepreneurs who have seen their wellness concept through to success, what have they had in common? And where have those who have not had success, where did they falter? And it actually fitted perfectly with the Dunning-Kruger's emotional cycle of change. I talked last week about how in the emotional cycle of change, you start up in Mount Stoop at the highest point you are emotionally when you are starting a new project and you are incredibly fired. And then you start going that valley of this down that valley of despair into that river of misery and then going back, hopefully getting through to Mount Transformation. And I also talked about how those who actually got to Mount Transformation, what exactly they did. And they all had a few core characteristics in common. And that is what has further informed my essence framework. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into that presentation that I had created for you and continue on that journey. So we're talking about how to master creating impactful wellness concepts, because it really is this art to master, and it is something you can definitely master. It's not this one hit wonder, or it's not something that happens by fluke. Actually, it's quite simple and straightforward. And I guess the reason many people sometimes don't see their wellness concept through to success is because it's actually quite simple. But doing simple things as entrepreneurs, we have learned, is not always the easy way forward. So I talked about the emotional cycle of change, also known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I'll just briefly go through it again. So we see in the vertical axis, we see your level of emotions and how happy and how sad you are, and then the time it takes to actually succeed. When you're in phase one, you are also what they call on Mount Stupid. This is where you are fired, you have that naivety, you know that your concept is going to work, you think that there is nothing out there like what you have, and that it'll be the only thing in the market like what you have. And what drives us when we are in phase one, what drives us when we are in Mount Stupid, on top of Mount Stupid, is that uninformed optimism. And it is a beautiful thing to be on Mount Stupid, because if we weren't at that level, there is no way in our right minds would we actually venture on a journey of entrepreneurship or any project or goal or venture that is difficult. But then something interesting happens. Once we start implementing this idea we have that we think is the most unique, that the market has never seen in the world before, once we start implementing it, we actually start to see that that idea is not as brilliant as we thought. There are many holes in it, and we have far more obstacles than we initially envisaged to actually make it a success. So that is when we start going down that valley of despair. We enter into phase two, which I call the valley of despair, that informed pessimism. You suddenly get this kind of harsh reality, this awakening that it isn't that easy. And then you get into eventually phase three, the valley of despair, which I also call the river of misery. And what generally tends to happen, like I was mentioning last week, is that we tend as humans to oscillate between Mount Stupid and the river of misery. We want to implement new ideas. We want to do something that no one has ever done before. We have that naivety. We have the best of intentions. But what happens is once we start going down that valley of despair and into that river of misery, it becomes so difficult and so disappointing. We're at such a low level that we abandon ship and go back up again to Mount Stupid with another idea of ours. And then we only find out that after several attempts, the journey is the same. We still have to go down that valley of despair, and we still have to swim in that river of misery, irrespective of the number of years of experience we have or the number of projects we have actually implemented. Now, what is it that those social entrepreneurs who had success with wellness, what did they do differently? They still went through that emotional cycle of change. They too were on Mount Stupid. They too had to go down the valley of despair. They too had to swim in the river of misery. No one escapes it. But the question is, how, despite all of that, did they manage to get the success they have with their wellness concepts? And I talked about last week the Essence Framework and how my Essence Framework actually helps people successfully navigate through this emotional cycle of change. There are 7 stages across 4 phases. So you have the stages of expectation, story, system, execution, navigation, consistency, and engagement. And in the phases of expectation and story, we're talking about planning, creating your strong wellness concept. Then we enter into the stage of implementation, where we go into execution, we go into system, and then execution. And once we have successfully implemented that concept, we enter into one of the most difficult phases, which is iteration. We start off with navigation, continue into consistency, and once we've managed to fix what isn't working, we finally get into that grow. So this is how it pans out when you're looking at that emotional cycle of change. I talked about last week how really fundamentally, when we are talking about a wellness asset, so those people who have success with wellness, those people who have and are having that genuine lasting impact, if we think about how they actually got it, we know that it's because it's the result of proud people. They're very able to attract and retain proud people who believe in their vision. We're not talking about wellness or finance ninjas. We're talking about ordinary people who are able and willing to do extraordinary work. They also deliver their guests transformative experiences each and every time. And as a result, they enjoy stellar performance. And how they actually, what drives the levers of proud people and stellar performance is that certainty of purpose. This is what I went through last week. And when you have that certainty of purpose, you are moving from the state of constant chaos to clarity. Because when you don't have that clarity, you are essentially anchorless. This is why many entrepreneurs find themselves stuck in Mount Stupid, never really knowing how to go down the valley of despair. And I talked about the 3 stages that actually get you that certainty of purpose: expectation, also known as the perfect wellness concept framework; story, also known as the winning plan framework; and system, also known as your special way framework. So, what is it that the successful wellness social entrepreneurs do when they are on Mount Stupid, just like all of us? I mentioned last week how they're actually preparing themselves to get all the stakeholders on the same page. They're preparing themselves and all the stakeholders to successfully go down the valley of despair. They know they're going to go down that valley of despair. And what they do is prepare themselves. They ensure they have a solid wellness asset from the get-go. They ensure that they get every single person on the same page so that everyone, so to speak, is singing from the same hymn sheet. Instead of each stakeholder, maybe well intentioned, trying to push their own agenda, hence what leads to that constant state of chaos. They're also deeply intimate with who they serve. They have that clarity who their avatar, their ideal guest is. They're very clear about their values, and they're also incredibly clear about the values of the people they want to serve. And from there, they define how they do wellness and hospitality in a special way. Because deep down, they know it's never the what that will differentiate them, but it's the how they choose to do wellness in hospitality. These entrepreneurs, when they're up on Mount Stupid, they're very clear as to their purpose. They're very clear on what road they're going to go to. They're very clear that any road will take them to Rome, and they're definitely getting to Rome. And that is what prepares them to actually successfully go down the valley of despair, not only themselves, but their teams. Now, in this second video, I wanted to delve further into what happens when we actually get into that valley of despair and eventually get right to the bottom and we're in that river of misery. Here is what the successful social entrepreneurs have done. They have had that discipline of focus. They have stayed steadfast on who they are, why they do what they do, and who they serve. They have been steadfast in the approach. They have refused to get sidetracked by the next bling trend. They are aware it's never their what that will differentiate them, but the how. But what happens to those of us who do not have that discipline of focus, when we lose that kind of North Star, that guiding kind of what guides us, that anchor, we end up becoming capricious. We are in this constant state of getting sidetracked because we are in search of that magic product, that brand or service that will help us differentiate ourselves from the hotel next door. This is what happens when you do not have that discipline of focus. And what sets those successful wellness entrepreneurs apart from those who have not is this fundamental stage. They go prepared into the valley of despair. They go right down to the river of misery. And instead of resisting the river of misery and trying to get out of it as soon as possible, they stay in the river of misery and they work on what isn't. They work on fixing what isn't working. And the parts of my essence framework that equip you to have this discipline of focus are the stages of execution, also known as the lean and ideal team framework. The number one problem that every single entrepreneur in our industry has, and I'm sure across multiple industries, is people. They simply can't find the people to serve their guests. And here is what is different with those entrepreneurs who actually have had success with wellness. They're not looking for extraordinary talent. They're not looking for wellness ninjas. They're looking for ordinary talent, many times local, but talent who shares the same vision. Ordinary talent willing to do extraordinary work. They're not reinventing the wheel. They are going to do wellness and hospitality according to this social entrepreneur's special way of doing wellness and hospitality. Then the next stage is navigation. And navigation is also known as your course correction framework. Now, when I was researching for my book, The Wellness Asset, and I was working through giving some examples of navigation, I read that the Apollo 13 rocket, now, this rocket, where probably decades of research went into it, millions or billions of dollars, the most intelligent minds, all working to get the Apollo 13 rocket onto the moon. Still then, despite having all this, the Apollo 13 rocket was off course for 97% of its trajectory. Now, let me say that again. The Apollo 13 rocket, with NASA's best minds, unlimited budget, despite all the resources it had and the great minds, it was off course for 97% of its trajectory, which means that it was on point, on course, on track for only 3% of its time. Now we're talking about NASA, unlimited funds, and the most intelligent minds out there. Now, if they had to constantly course correct, how can we in our small businesses expect to be on course with our certainty of purpose, with our guiding star, which I call the gyroscope in expectation? How can we expect or even take for granted that we are going to be on course, that we're going to nail it the first time round, that we're going to hit it out of the park the first time? That never happens. And also, when I got into this when I started writing 16 years ago and I got into my business, I was fascinated by Eric Ries, I think that's how you pronounce it, and his lean business strategy. And he talked about the minimum viable product. I'm not sure who would have um, coined that term, but I learned it from him. So I'm going to reference him. And I was fascinated how in the tech world, everyone is ready to go to market with a minimal viable product. Something is still in the beta version. They think it's perfectly normal. They get it to the point where it's solid. It is a good work in progress product, a beta version, and they fine tune in the market. They don't wait for the product to be absolutely perfect and definitely don't think that it's perfect. So, in our industry, in our services industry, those who have had success with something like wellness in hospitality are those social entrepreneurs who are very comfortable with fine tuning what isn't quite right and adapting it to the market. They don't come with that kind of arrogance, if you want to call it, or that preconceived idea that it's already perfect. And that if it isn't working, obviously it's our guests' fault. They are not sophisticated enough, or our staff, our people just don't know wellness. So, this in navigation, we're staying on course, and that is with your big picture goals. And the last thing that these social entrepreneurs who have had success with wellness do is they actually set their teams up for success. They're not looking to hire and train fire people who are proficient in firefighting. They want real human beings to be serving real human beings. And they do everything in their power to set them up for success. They observe the patterns of mistake and failures, and they put the right checks in place to ensure that these service glitches, these blunders in service, do not occur on a repeated basis. And that is why they're able to have proud people as an outcome and deliver transformative experiences. They're not in conferences talking about how difficult it is to find people. Instead, they're staying true to what they want to do, what their purpose is, who they want to serve, and how is it that they do wellness. And that is what helps them be in that river of misery. They're not scared of that river of misery. They're in it and they're committed to fix what isn't right. They're also committed to pivot or slightly turn if they need to in order to have that genuine lasting impact they want. So this is kind of today I wanted to jump in. Probably I got too serious and talk about how to prepare yourself when you are going down that valley of despair and you are in that river of misery. Those social entrepreneurs who I have seen have success when they were up on Mount Stupid, they made sure that they had that certainty of purpose. They prepared both themselves and their teams so that they could successfully go down that valley of despair. And they were also acutely aware that they would get into that river of misery. But what separated them from the rest was their discipline of focus. They're committed to find those ordinary people who are willing to go the extra mile. They stay on track with the big picture goals. They do not compromise their values ecosystem. They don't care about the blink happening next door or wherever the market is going. That doesn't mean they're ignorant. That doesn't mean they stay in a bubble of their own because they're actively fixing what isn't working. They actually have a very close pulse on what their guests are saying. And they're actively trying to resolve those well-being related problems. And they're also putting on the right checks in place to make sure that their teams can successfully and easily deliver those transformative experiences to their guests. And this is all happening in that river of misery. So, next week, I will be talking about how you actually get beyond that river of misery and get up to Mount Transformation. And on that inspiring note, I wish you all a beautiful day ahead. Take care now.